Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lynch. I am your host of Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. We're brought to you live every third Wednesday of every month, and our number here is 617-708-3290. Please feel free to call in at any time. We'd be happy to try to answer your question. We do have a very interesting program here today. We have a former candidate for the United States Senate, and probably, in my opinion, my very humble opinion, certainly one of the best immigration lawyers here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a prolific writer, and quite knowledgeable on immigration issues. Marissa Franco, how are you?
Thank you, Tim. I'm great. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm great.
Good.
It's a pleasure to have you. I noticed, we have yet another
Yes.
primary season for
That's right.
United States Senate seat, and your name is conspicuously absent.
Unfortunately, yes. We did take a hard look at running again, and it wasn't yet when this special election came around. It hadn't even been 8 months since my last race.
Wow.
And we were very serious about taking a look, but, sort of running against the Democratic machine twice in one calendar year. I'm tough. Don't get me wrong.
No, please, I know that. I know that.
But I also, my practice and commitments to my family and my clients, I would, put those first. And
Well, the time commitment alone must have been huge.
very. And since I'm not independently wealthy, I actually worked the entire 18 months that I was campaigning. So,
Yeah.
I would have had to do that again.
So
And
18 months.
18 months. True grassroots. Real grassroots, not that phony stuff.
Oh, I remember I was at a little Quincy meeting, Quincy Democratic
not so
breakfast
little.
meeting, and there you were.
There I was, and
So,
you were
yeah.
there, and it
Yeah.
was great to see you there.
Wow. So, well, good for you,
did it.
Good for you putting up the good fight.
Thanks. Well, I'm not done yet.
No,
I'm not in this race, but that doesn't mean I might not be in another
Well, good. Well,
in the future.
good. Well, why don't we turn to what you what you do for regular business
In my day job.
in your day job, which is immigration.
That's right.
And you've been on the show before, and you had one fascinating case
Yes.
involving a Uganda national.
That's right.
And I find this story absolutely fascinating. So I'd love to hear from you again.
Well-
Just for our viewing audience, what that case involved.
Absolutely. It's actually the second year of our awesome victory. We got approved, so I'll tell everyone, up front that the case was approved. It was a gentleman who's gay from Uganda and actually also happened to be deaf. And so, as the viewing audience probably knows, Uganda has a horrific anti-gay bill that is, essentially a death penalty for the people who are in the LGBT community. And unfortunately, I'm here to say that 2 years later, it hasn't improved. But his case took a phenomenal amount of time. It was pro bono work that I did, and he not only was he facing the discrimination based on being gay from Uganda, but he also had the additional hardship of being deaf, and he faced a lot of discrimination, I'll tell you, here in this country. And I was not too impressed with both federal and state agencies that I had to deal with. Case in point, where I was trying to get services for him for American Sign Language interpreter, and disability laws provide that he must be provided that interpreter service when you're dealing with different agencies or public accommodations, such as doctor's office. And everybody, each of these agencies, from a Nobel Prize winning agency, if I told you the name, you'd know it, told me verbatim, we can't help your client because that's a foreign language. And they're on the hook for paying for their own foreign language interpreting.
Foreign language being sign language, or foreign language being
Exactly the perplexed look on your face that I'm sitting there on the phone. And I said, no, you clueless people. ASL is not a foreign language. And
Yeah,
so
it's
they didn't even
sign language in English.
Exactly. Well, exactly. It's not. It's disability law related, and it has absolutely nothing to do with foreign language. But they were trying to use this as a pass to basically get out of paying for the services. I, as an attorney, I didn't know, taking on his case, that when he came to my office, even though it was pro bono, and he was willing to pay for an interpreter, I couldn't allow him to pay for the interpreter to show up at my office because, since I'm a public accommodation, I'm on the hook for paying for that interpreter. And so, and I didn't know that, but when I found out, hey, that's what I got to do. That's what I got to do. And I'm, just a small law office, but these big organizations and the state and federal agencies, who obviously have more funds at their disposal, fought me tooth and nail to basically.
Well, you would think not simply that they have more funds, but you would think if they're a big agency, they'd have on staff somebody who does sign language.
They don't. I mean, unfortunately, it's not as much of a demand, say in the federal courts or even in the state courts, but there are services that provide interpreters.
Sure.
So, and since it's federal law, you'd think that the federal system would be aware of their, but commonly, as you know, law offices tend to be very big violators of discrimination laws, and the federal government is no different. So those who know better are sometimes the worst.
What a sad commentary.
But let me give you the uplift on the other end of it. We went to court, and because of his status of being gay and also of having the challenge of being deaf, we won the case, based on the fact that if the U.S. government sent him back to Uganda, he would be, either tortured or killed. So.
Yeah, and the background is basically he came over here as a special ed teacher.
He came over as a student, and then as a student first, and then he was learning, then to teach others, and very well educated, just amazing
very productive
person.
Member of society.
Yes.
And while he's here, people from Western Mass go over to Uganda. And convince those people that they should enact these draconian laws.
That's right.
And one is if you're gay, you're put to death.
Right.
Two, if you know somebody's gay and you don't disclose them, you go to jail.
Exactly. You can be jailed for not reporting your friends and family. And it's real. And there's been a high-profile murders. David Cato actually was just murdered right before our case. And at first, the government attorney was giving me flack and saying, I don't think that he qualifies for persecution simply because of this law, because, get this, because it wasn't enacted. It was only a proposed bill.
Oh my goodness.
That was at the yes. So I just very calmly stated my case, and we had sort of a little pretrial conference right there. You don't get pretrial conferences in immigration court. You get one day, and that's it. But so like a mini pretrial before the judge came into the room, and actually by the end of the case, the attorney was convinced, and she sort of stipulated to several of our arguments. Good. And as one of my colleagues that came along to watch, she said that was the fastest approved asylum case she had ever seen.
Well, it was, anybody who hears this, somebody going back to their home is going to be put to death. I mean, well, you would think it immediately.
It's a no-brainer, but U.S. asylum law is very hostile, not just people LGBT, but also to women, because it's a very high threshold to prove that you're in this group that should be protected. I know it sounds...
You've written on that, too.
Yes,
I'm going to get to that. But before we do, you've mentioned a couple of times you handled this case pro bono.
That's right.
And for our viewing audience, what does pro bono mean?
Free.
Yeah.
Actually, in my case, not even free. It cost me money.
Yeah, so. I bet it did. I bet it did.
Yes, exactly.
And people, one of the unsung heroes of our profession are people who do take cases pro bono.
That's right.
People who do not have access to our legal system, but for the fact that there are good Samaritans out there, you being one of them, who will take on a case like this, a Herculean case, quite frankly.
It was about.
He was at Logan Airport, right? And they were trying to put him on a plane. You had to file all sorts of motions, do a lot of work,
right?
And you did it pro bono, for free, and out of the goodness of your heart, which I think speaks volumes about you.
Well, thanks. But it was you can't, in a case like that, how can you say no? I know, so I guess
how do you
some people
sleep at night? Wow.
I had the skills and I had the tenacity because I walked in, basically my colleague said it was approved pretty quickly, and it was. We had the hearing was truncated, but because I walked in there with a massive binder with all of my affidavit, there is not one thing that my client could be contradicted on, because we worked like crazy, and that's the piece about immigration litigation that people don't kind of know, is that some lawyers will just put forward this simple 3-page affidavit and they don't get into all of the details, and their client gets tripped up on the most mundane of things, and then all of a sudden they get denied because the client comes off as not credible. And it's a mix of cultural ability when testifying and the lawyer, whether they prepared their client properly. So that's why, and especially when you're dealing, it's hard enough when you're having a regular conversation with your client, but we had to go through the interpreter on the phone, and doing an interview on the phone took like 3 times as long as a regular.
Sure. Well, yeah.
And
you had to interview people from Uganda as well with the lay of the land there, or?
A couple of people I talked to, yes. So
Yeah, these expenses are mounting.
yes, so
Wow.
it was almost about 300 hours actually of pro bono
No
work.
doubt.
So,
No doubt.
and we won. But what the problem is, though, like, this is great. It was so great that we won, and I was so happy for my client. But what makes me quite irate, in fact, is that it takes that much work to win an asylum case against the U.S. government, which is we're supposed to be that beacon of justice and protector of human rights.
So let's get into that.
I don't mind a little hard work, but somewhere between 10 hours of pro bono work and 300 of hours is your problem.
Well, first of all, what is asylum? What is it? What exactly is that?
Okay, so it's somebody who's being persecuted. There's 5 recognized groups, and it's race, religion, political opinion, ethnicity, and then this catch-all category called social group.
Social group.
Social group. Yes. What is social group? It's you have to prove you're part of this group that has an immutable characteristic that you cannot or should not have to change. And this is where women and people who are gay have to fit themselves into this social group. So before you can even get to the fact, so asylum, first of all, you have to fit into one of the groups. And then the second piece is that you have to show because you're a member of that group, one of those 5 groups, you are being persecuted by the government of your home country or an organization that government refuses to control. So, and it's very political. Like if you're from Cuba, if you step foot on American soil, you're going to be granted political asylum. But if you're from Haiti, pretty much forget about it. And it's the same thing with countries in Latin America coming from right-wing or left-wing dictatorships. And so it's a whole history back through the 80s and the 70s of which cases for political asylum are easier to win or next to impossible to win. But then coming back to that social group characteristic, like if you're a certain race, you don't have to prove that you're a Black South African. You are a Black South African. It's evident, right? But if you're in a social group, if you're gay, first you have to prove that you're gay.
Okay.
Right? And then you have to
That's
prove that
interesting.
that group is being persecuted. Same for women. Women have to show that they are being persecuted not because of regular criminal activity, but because they're women. Now get this. I recently won a case on sex trafficking case. And
Which is?
what is sex trafficking?
Yeah, what is
so, the criminal elements are different groups basically picking up young women on the streets as young as, it can be 5 years old, 12 years old, 18. The age group goes anywhere from 12 to 30. They pick them up and, they just sell them off to brothels or across all countries and all borders for pay, forced prostitution, forced trafficking in women and sometimes boys, but predominantly women. But now the U.S. government is saying that that's not going to qualify for asylum because it's just regular criminal activity. Yes.
I can't imagine
That is
anything more. Well, I can imagine more demeaning, but not much.
Yes,
I mean,
well, the
that's just so horrible. I mean, that's institutionalized rape.
Well, pretty much.
And what is more horrific than that, really? I mean, you're just hard pressed. So okay, what happens?
According to a recent appellate court, and this is currently evolving sort of in a case that I'm involved in, but the UN Declaration of Human Rights recognizes trafficking as persecution. I mean, that's the whole linchpin of the argument. It is recognized as persecution. But now you have the appeals court saying, no, it's not persecution. It's really just this regular criminal activity. Like say if you have the mafia in New York or the Russian mob in New York City, they're saying, oh, you're not being persecuted in New York City. That's just regular criminal activity. And that's akin to, women in Albania, which is one of the main sources of women in trafficking. and that's just sort of regular criminal activity. And I find it completely offensive and abhorrent.
Was it a circuit court or was it a
It's the Immigration Appeals Court,
okay,
right?
so we
But the
can't-
circuit court's actually also not great on it either. Yes.
This is why I mean, low percentage of women judges. I guess that might be an issue there.
Actually, the woman,
Sensitized
the
to
judge
these
I won in
issues.
front of was a woman,
Yeah.
and you know she got it, and so but now we're dealing with the problem of the appeal. So, and the other issue with those types of cases are social visibility. This is a whole
Social visibility.
You have to prove that someone knows that you are a member of that persecuted group. That you,
Okay.
like, what do you wear? Some kind of, label on your coat that says, "I'm a persecuted woman of sex trafficking. I'm gay." Like, imagine you're from Uganda and you're gay, right? You spend your whole life trying to keep yourself from being outed for being
Yes.
gay because your life is at risk.
Yes.
So now you come before a U.S. government authority, and they're saying, "Well, how do we know you're really gay?" This is because it sounds like a Kafka novel or something, but it is truly disturbing because no one's really. It's not in the mainstream media. This idea of having to prove who you are. There's actually been court cases, saying to gay applicants that. Well, you weren't out in your home country. You weren't part of an organization. You didn't march in the parades. Of course you didn't.
Yeah.
Because you can't expect somebody to do that and risk their lives. And so
Well, they risk
now you
not
have
only
a
their
problem.
own lives. A lot of these places, they risk their families,
Right.
and people lose. Supposedly mom and dad lose face or whatever, or their businesses are shot. I mean,
Right.
we're not talking about
Just
just the
one.
individual. We're talking about the entire family
Right.
could be affected in some of these cultures.
And there's a good circuit court that has an opinion opposing social visibility. But our circuit, is basing a lot of their opinions on that argument. And I find it just completely disgraceful piece of our current state of the law. So, I mean, I wrote about it, as you said. I've gone to elected officials to say, let's change this. Let's get women and people who are gay their own category in political asylum. So they don't have to jump. They still have to prove that they were persecuted, that they themselves suffered some type of torture or persecution. That's hard enough in and of itself. But they shouldn't have to prove, get themselves into the category first.
Yeah,
So-
it seems crazy. I mean,
It is insane.
how many years ago the two 17-year-old boys were hung in Iran because they kissed? I mean,
Yeah.
what more do you need
Well, right.
to say that this group suffers persecution?
Tim, that's a very good point, because we're basically at the stage in immigration asylum law where we were sort of in domestic violence maybe in the late 70s, early 80s, where you couldn't get anybody to help you unless you got beat up first.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, how do we know that your husband or boyfriend or whatever, or your significant other is going to do you harm? It's just like, so then after you get beaten or unfortunately
worse.
murdered, then it's like, oh, okay, now maybe perhaps you can have a restraining order, but a lot of good it does you. And that's kind of, because I did a lot of work in when I was in law school in the mid-90s, it was starting to improve, with Battered Women's program that we did and things like that. But it's sort of like when I was learning about that area of law and now I'm dealing with this area, the juxtaposition of the two, yeah.
It's not, but that's true. It seems to me, whenever you practice one area of law and you go into another, you do see similar trends.
Exactly.
So this was a good benefit. At
Yeah,
least,
well, yeah,
to see that, but wow.
we're just really behind. I mean, we're 2 decades, 3 decades behind, and we're supposed to be the cutting edge of human rights, the cutting edge of
United
equality.
States,
Yes,
of
yes,
course.
we, the United States, and we're just not living up to.
And I think one of your articles had statistics in it, like we allow a much smaller percentage of people in this country per 100,000.
That's right, per capita.
Per capita than many other countries.
Refugees, exactly. Like people think, oh, we let in a lot of refugees, and you just look at sheer numbers. Of course, it's going to be large because we're a large country.
Correct.
But if you look at the per capita, we're actually we have one of the smaller amounts, precisely.
Which
Also
is
a factor.
counterintuitive, I think, to the public, because that is our country.
It is. It
Our
is.
country is built upon refugees.
Well, you know that chick on the Eastern Seaboard that says, give us your tired, your poor, your
Yeah,
huddled masses.
there you
It doesn't
go.
say only give us your high-tech workers and your PhDs, which is pretty much what the current discussion is in immigration right now is like, we want all the super smart people. And it's basically saying to people like my grandparents who came over with a zero education from Sicily, it's like saying, we don't want you. And it's just not what the Statue of Liberty, I mean, that's pretty prima facie evidence of what we're supposed to be. So, and for refugees, and it's a factor of geography too, because other countries of how they're situated, they have a lot more influx of people, Europe, in Africa and Asia, and Iran has more refugees coming across their borders for this, not because it's a great place, especially for women to go to. But if you're fleeing Afghanistan, right? If you're fleeing Afghanistan,
Iraq,
sort of like it's how do you get to America? Pretty hard. Maybe you can get into Iran, and it's a choice between two bad places. So
that's fascinating. So you keep very busy.
Very. I've been so I've been doing some media about various pieces on immigration, and I'll go wherever people want me to talk because it's a very misunderstood area. The senators and the Congress, and I'm sorry to say, even the president, have very limited grasp on the actual
Well, last time you were here, you said the immigration laws we're living with now were done in the 1950s and 60s.
That's right, yeah.
And here we are, 2013, and we're, extraordinarily different country.
A full 60 years later, the economy is completely different. The makeup is totally different. But they just don't want to deal with it. It's hard. Everybody has their, people traditionally say, oh, Republicans are anti-immigrant and Democrats are pro-immigrant. And I'm, as you know me well, Tim, I criticize both parties because they're both to blame. And Democrats are very corporate immigration driven. They will give, sort of lip service to the downtrodden immigrants or the people who are not the high-skilled workers, but really they and the Republicans, both sides are wedded to making immigration as easy as possible for big corporations, not the small businesses that I represent who want a crack at some of these visa categories for special workers. And that's pretty much where the tempo of immigration reform is right now.
The tempo being skewed towards large corporations and highly educated.
High tech, right. Science, technology, engineering, and math, known as the STEM areas, to the disservice of every other. I mean, I work in that area. I represent a lot of clients who have very cutting edge technologies, and I'm very much in favor of having immigrants in that area. But I also represent high caliber restaurants who have high caliber chefs, but they're cut out of that process. I represent places that employ teachers or social workers, preschool teachers, all different categories that are completely excluded from this type of discussion.
Now, I have to wrap up here.
Okay, wow, already.
Quick, right?
Yeah.
But if anybody wants to know more, they can go to your webpage.
That's right, yourimmigrationcenter.com.
www.yourimmigrationcenter.com.
That's right. Or follow me on Twitter now, at Marissa DeFranco, MarIsaDefranco.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for doing all the good work, too. Wow.
You're welcome. And come back as often as you ask.
Please. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to have updates in the immigration bill, so I guess it would be good to have you back on that.
Anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.